The day people stop noticing the quiet man in the room is often the day they discover he was carrying the entire building. Monday mornings inside Hayes Digital Solutions usually began with confidence, fresh coffee, and ambitious conversations about growth. Located in downtown Seattle, the company's headquarters overlooked Elliott Bay through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the early morning sunlight. Engineers hurried through the lobby with laptops under their arms. Executives reviewed reports while elevators climbed toward the upper floors, and every screen displayed another successful quarter. Few people noticed Ethan Brooks walking through the entrance carrying nothing more than a weathered leather laptop bag and a small lunch container prepared by his 10-year-old daughter before school. At 43 years old, Ethan looked more like an ordinary father than one of the architects behind one of the most reliable enterprise systems in the Pacific Northwest. His neatly pressed blue shirt had been worn many times. His brown shoes had been polished until they looked newer than they were, and his calm expression never changed regardless of the pressure surrounding him. He greeted the security guard by name, asked about his grandson's baseball game from the weekend, and continued upstairs without drawing attention to himself. On the top floor, the executive conference room had already filled with department heads waiting for an important announcement from Chief Executive Officer Victoria Hayes. At 38, Victoria had built a reputation for making bold decisions that impressed investors. Intelligent, disciplined, and fiercely competitive, she believed companies stayed successful by constantly replacing good with better. That morning, she stood confidently beside a large presentation screen displaying a single sentence that immediately captured everyone's attention. Building tomorrow starts with better talent. Beside her stood Ryan Collins, a celebrated systems consultant recruited from one of the nation's largest technology firms. His impressive resume included international projects, prestigious certifications, and interviews in leading technology magazines. Many employees exchanged excited glances, believing they were about to witness the beginning of an exciting new chapter. Ethan quietly entered the room and took his usual seat near the back without interrupting anyone. Victoria began speaking with practiced confidence. Our company has reached a point where experience alone is no longer enough. We need fresh thinking, modern leadership, and recognized expertise if we want to stay ahead. Several executives nodded in agreement. Ryan smiled politely while adjusting his tailored suit jacket. Victoria continued. Effective immediately, Ryan Collins will become our new senior systems architect. The room filled with applause. Ethan joined the applause without hesitation, offering the same respectful smile he gave everyone else. Then Victoria looked toward him. Her expression remained professional, but her next sentence changed the atmosphere completely. Unfortunately, maintaining two leadership positions is no longer practical. Ethan Brooks, today will be your final day with Hayes Digital Solutions. Silence replaced the applause. Several engineers lowered their eyes. Others looked toward Ethan, expecting disbelief, frustration, or protest. Instead, Ethan simply nodded once. I understand, he answered quietly. Victoria continued reading prepared notes about restructuring, efficiency, and organizational direction, but few people listened anymore. Ethan calmly opened his notebook, wrote down a few reminders for unfinished projects, and carefully removed a family photograph from his desk after the meeting ended. The picture showed him and Emma smiling beside a small lake during a summer camping trip. He placed it inside his leather bag before shutting down his computer for the final time. One of the younger engineers hurried after him. Mr. Brooks, this cannot be happening. You build almost everything we use. Ethan smiled gently. No system belongs to one person forever. Take good care of each other. He handed the engineer a neatly organized folder containing passwords, documentation, emergency procedures, and handwritten notes explaining the company's most complicated infrastructure. You might need this someday. Downstairs, Emma waited patiently on a wooden bench outside the building, finishing her homework while swinging her legs beneath the morning sunshine. The moment she saw her father, she smiled brightly and waved. Ethan returned the smile before walking toward her with steady steps, never looking back at the towering glass building behind him. High above the street, Victoria watched from her office window as father and daughter disappeared into the busy Seattle crowd, completely unaware that the quiet man she had just replaced had been holding together far more than a job title. The following morning, Hayes Digital Solutions welcomed Ryan Collins with the excitement usually reserved for major product launches. Fresh banners displayed the company's new innovation initiative. Department managers introduced him to engineering teams, and executives praised the decision to recruit one of the industry's most recognized technology specialists. Ryan accepted every handshake with polished confidence. His credentials spoke for themselves, and nobody questioned that he possessed exceptional technical knowledge. Victoria Hayes watched the introductions with quiet satisfaction, convinced she had positioned the company for an even stronger future. During the first executive briefing, Ryan confidently outlined plans to modernize the company's software architecture. Colorful diagrams covered the conference room screens while executives nodded with growing enthusiasm. His presentation included advanced cloud strategies, automation improvements, artificial intelligence integration, and infrastructure redesigns that sounded impressive to every department leader. Victoria smiled several times throughout the meeting. Everything appeared to confirm that replacing Ethan Brooks had been the correct business decision. Meanwhile, on the other side of Seattle, Ethan's morning followed a very different rhythm. Instead of joining rush hour traffic toward downtown, he drove Emma to school in their aging pickup truck. She sat beside him eating a homemade blueberry muffin while reading aloud from her history assignment. Ethan listened carefully, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that made her smile even wider. Before she stepped onto the sidewalk, she looked toward him with gentle concern. "Are you sad about yesterday?" Ethan paused before answering honestly. Losing a job can feel disappointing, but disappointment does not get to decide who we become next. Emma reached across the center console and squeezed his hand. "You always fix difficult things." Ethan smiled warmly. "Sometimes the most important thing to fix is your own attitude." After dropping her off, Ethan drove to the neighborhood library where he had volunteered several weekends each year. The librarian greeted him with genuine excitement. Several donated computers refused to start after years of heavy use, and the community center could not afford replacements. Ethan quietly rolled up his sleeves and began working without asking for payment. By lunchtime, 3 computers were already functioning again, allowing children to complete homework and seniors to access online services. The librarian thanked him repeatedly, but Ethan simply replied, "Technology is only valuable when it helps people." Back at Hayes Digital Solutions, Ryan spent the afternoon reviewing thousands of system files. He immediately noticed that many components lacked conventional documentation. Instead, countless small automation tools quietly handled routine tasks behind the scenes. They activated before employees even realized something needed attention. Ryan frowned while studying the architecture diagrams. "Why would anyone build a system this way?" he asked one of the senior engineers. The engineer hesitated before answering. "Honestly, most of us stopped asking years ago. Everything simply worked." Ryan leaned back thoughtfully. "That usually means there is unnecessary complexity." Confident in his assessment, he instructed the engineering team to begin replacing several automated monitoring processes with newer enterprise software that matched current industry standards. The engineers exchanged uncertain glances but followed his direction. After all, he had become their new leader. That evening, Victoria received another encouraging report describing Ryan's progress. She walked through the engineering department noticing renewed energy, optimistic conversations, and ambitious planning sessions. It looked exactly like the transformation she had imagined. Yet one small detail escaped nearly everyone's attention. Throughout the building, tiny automated background processes quietly stopped running one by one as new configurations gradually replaced years of invisible engineering. Nothing dramatic happened. No alarms sounded. No critical systems failed. Daily operations continued almost perfectly. The changes appeared successful because the strongest foundations rarely reveal their importance while everything is still standing. Across town, Ethan finished repairing the final library computer just before sunset. As he packed his tools, the librarian handed him a handwritten thank you card signed by several neighborhood children. Ethan smiled softly before placing it inside the same leather bag that still held the family photograph from his former office. He walked outside into the cool Seattle evening with Emma waiting beside the pickup after school, proudly holding a perfect score on her science quiz. Ethan congratulated her with genuine joy. completely unaware that the invisible foundation he had quietly built over 12 years was beginning to crack beneath the people who believed they no longer needed him. 3 weeks passed with surprising confidence inside Hayes Digital Solutions. Investors praised the company's aggressive modernization strategy. Department leaders celebrated faster development schedules, and Victoria Hayes received several congratulatory messages from business partners impressed by the company's new direction. Ryan Collins became the center of nearly every technical discussion. His presentations remained polished, his confidence never faded, and every meeting ended with another ambitious proposal designed to modernize systems that many people believed had become outdated. On the surface, everything appeared stronger than ever. Yet beneath that polished surface, small warning signs quietly began appearing where very few people thought to look. The first issue seemed insignificant. An automated backup completed 12 minutes later than usual. Ryan dismissed it as normal adjustment after infrastructure updates. 2 days later, a customer support dashboard briefly stopped synchronizing before correcting itself without intervention. Another engineer mentioned the unusual behavior during the morning meeting, but Ryan calmly explained that temporary inconsistencies often followed modernization projects. Victoria accepted the explanation without concern. The company continued moving forward. Meanwhile, Ethan Brooks settled comfortably into a quieter routine that looked almost ordinary from the outside. Every weekday morning began with breakfast alongside Emma before driving her to school. Afterward, Ethan accepted small consulting projects for local nonprofit organizations, schools, and community centers that could never afford expensive technology consultants. He repaired aging servers, improved outdated networks, and taught volunteers how to maintain their own equipment instead of becoming dependent on outside contractors. Every client thanked him for doing far more than they expected. Ethan always answered with the same gentle smile. If people understand the system, they will never have to fear it. Emma loved listening to those conversations. One evening, while helping her father organize tools inside their garage workshop, she asked, "Do you ever miss your old office?" Ethan carefully placed a screwdriver back into its drawer before answering. "I miss some people. I do not miss having a title." Emma looked thoughtful. "I still think they made a mistake." Ethan smiled warmly. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them." Across town, learning was becoming more difficult than anyone realized. Ryan had continued replacing automated monitoring programs that Ethan had quietly developed over 12 years. Many of those invisible processes had never appeared inside official documentation because they existed to solve problems before anyone noticed them. Some balanced server workloads during unexpected traffic increases. Others quietly repaired damaged data indexes while employees slept. Several automatically isolated unusual activity before it could spread across connected systems. Because those safeguards operated silently for years, almost nobody remembered they existed. As newer enterprise software gradually replaced them, hidden layers of protection disappeared without triggering immediate failures. Senior engineer Daniel Foster finally approached Ryan after noticing another unusual pattern inside overnight reports. "There are more background warnings than before," he said carefully. Ryan reviewed the graphs for only a few moments before shaking his head. The previous architecture depended too heavily on custom automation. Standardized platforms are more reliable in the long run. Daniel hesitated. Some of those custom tools were written because standard platforms could not solve these specific problems. Ryan smiled confidently. "Technology has changed. We do not need outdated workarounds anymore." Daniel quietly returned to his desk, unconvinced but unwilling to challenge his new supervisor again. Late Friday afternoon, Victoria walked through the engineering department feeling encouraged by the productive atmosphere. Employees remained busy, projects continued meeting deadlines, and clients had not reported any serious outages. She thanked Ryan for his leadership before leaving for the weekend. After the office emptied, only the quiet hum of servers filled the building. Deep inside the company's primary data center, several background warning indicators appeared one after another. None reached the emergency threshold. None triggered alarms. They simply accumulated silently inside system logs that almost nobody reviewed anymore. Hundreds of miles of carefully designed digital pathways continued carrying millions of transactions every hour, But the invisible balance that had protected them for more than a decade was becoming increasingly fragile. On Sunday evening, while Ethan and Emma laughed together over a homemade pizza and planned her upcoming science fair project, a small unnoticed error quietly replicated itself inside Hayes Digital Solutions for the first time, waiting patiently for the moment when one tiny crack would become impossible for anyone to ignore. The 30th morning arrived without warning, wearing the same gray Seattle sky that had greeted the city hundreds of times before. Commuters filled the sidewalks with steaming coffee cups, ferries crossed Elliott Bay on schedule, and employees streamed into Hayes Digital Solutions, expecting another ordinary workday. At exactly 8:15, customer service representatives noticed a few delayed account updates. 5 minutes later, the finance department reported that transactions were taking longer than normal to process. Ryan Collins reviewed the monitoring dashboard and assured everyone the slowdown was temporary. "The servers are responding," he said confidently. "Give the synchronization process a few more minutes." Victoria Hayes accepted the explanation and continued preparing for a virtual meeting with several important investors. Then, at exactly 8:28, every screen inside the operations center froze at once. One by one, status indicators turned yellow, then orange, then deep red. Customer portals stopped responding. Internal communication tools disconnected. Automated processing queues halted in mid-cycle. The silence that followed was more unsettling than any alarm. Within seconds, telephones began ringing across every department. Customer support representatives struggled to answer questions they could not yet explain. Regional managers requested immediate updates. Sales executives watched scheduled contracts disappear from their dashboards. The company had never experienced a failure of this scale. Ryan immediately assembled the engineering team. "Restart the affected clusters," he instructed. Engineers moved quickly, following established emergency procedures. Minutes passed. Nothing changed. Another engineer attempted to restore the previous configuration. The system rejected the recovery process before it could finish. Daniel Foster examined diagnostic logs with growing concern. Every solution seemed to create another problem somewhere else. It was as though invisible connections inside the infrastructure no longer understood one another. Victoria entered the operations center, her calm expression beginning to fade. "How long until everything is back online?" Ryan looked toward the largest monitoring screen before answering more quietly than usual. "I need more time." Outside consultants joined emergency conference calls from New York, Austin, and Silicon Valley. They reviewed architecture diagrams, analyzed performance data, and suggested advanced recovery strategies. Every recommendation failed before reaching completion. One consultant finally admitted, "We understand enterprise platforms, but this environment behaves differently. There are custom dependencies we cannot identify." Daniel lowered his eyes. He remembered Ethan's handwritten folder sitting untouched inside a storage cabinet after everyone assumed the digital documentation would be enough. He quietly retrieved it and placed it on the conference table. The pages contained detailed notes written in Ethan's careful handwriting, explaining not only how individual systems operated, but why they had been designed that way. Beside several diagrams appeared the same sentence repeated more than once. "Never remove the invisible safeguards until you understand what they are protecting." Ryan slowly turned each page, his confidence fading with every paragraph. Many of the automated processes he had replaced were clearly connected to protective mechanisms that never appeared inside conventional architecture diagrams. They had quietly prevented small inconsistencies from growing into major failures. Without them, countless hidden relationships inside the system had gradually unraveled until everything reached a breaking point together. Victoria stared at the handwritten notes in complete silence. She suddenly remembered Ethan leaving the building with nothing but a worn leather bag and a respectful smile, never once defending himself or criticizing anyone. Around her, dozens of talented engineers continued searching desperately for answers, yet every passing minute made the situation worse. Customers continued calling. Business partners demanded explanations. Investors requested emergency briefings. The company's reputation, carefully built over many years, was beginning to weaken by the hour. Daniel finally spoke the words that nobody in the room wanted to hear. "We are trying to repair a house without understanding its foundation." The room became completely still. No one argued. No one offered another quick solution. For the first time since Ethan Brooks had quietly walked away 30 days earlier, everyone realized they had never replaced the man who understood the system. They had only replaced the title on his office door. As the hours passed, confidence slowly gave way to humility inside Hayes Digital Solutions. The emergency meetings became quieter, not because the crisis had improved, but because every obvious solution had already failed. Outside consultants requested more system logs, senior engineers reviewed years of archive configurations, and Ryan Collins remained focused on every technical possibility he could imagine. Yet each attempt revealed another layer of complexity that no modern architecture diagram seemed to explain. Shortly after noon, Daniel Foster carefully placed Ethan Brooks's handwritten folder back onto the conference table. This time, nobody ignored it. Victoria Hayes slowly opened another section filled with neatly drawn diagrams, personal observations, and notes that sounded less like software documentation and more like advice from someone protecting people he might never meet. One sentence caught her attention immediately. Build every safeguard as if someone else will someday need it without knowing it exists. Victoria read the line twice before quietly closing the folder. She looked around the conference room, where exhausted employees stared at computer screens that refused to cooperate. For the first time in many years, she realized she had measured talent by visibility instead of responsibility. Ryan finally broke the silence. I can identify the damaged relationships between services, but I cannot predict how they were originally balanced. Whoever designed this understood every interaction from the beginning. Daniel answered gently rather than critically. That was Ethan. He never built systems to impress people. He built them so nobody would notice them. The words settled heavily across the room. Nobody argued because everyone knew they were true. Victoria walked back into her office and stood quietly beside the window overlooking downtown Seattle. Exactly 1 month earlier, she had watched Ethan leave with his worn leather bag while believing she was making the company stronger. Now she found herself wondering how many times he had quietly prevented disasters that nobody even knew had almost happened. Her assistant entered carefully. Several board members are asking whether we should release another public statement. Victoria remained silent for a long moment before answering. Not yet. She understood that another statement would not restore customer confidence. Only restoring the system would. Across the city, Ethan spent the afternoon inside the Community Learning Center where several high school students gathered around old desktop computers that he had helped restore. Instead of solving problems for them, he patiently explained how to trace each issue one step at a time. Technology rewards curiosity more than speed, he told them. If you only memorize answers, the next problem will always defeat you. If you understand why something works, you can build something even better. The students listened carefully as Ethan encouraged each of them to discover the solution themselves. Emma sat nearby, finishing homework, occasionally smiling as she watched her father celebrate every small success the students achieved. His satisfaction came not from being the smartest person in the room, but from making everyone else more capable. Late that afternoon, Victoria quietly left the office without informing the board or the executive team where she was going. Daniel had located the address of the Community Learning Center from a volunteer organization that Ethan frequently supported. During the drive across Seattle, she replayed the events of the past month over and over in her mind. She remembered Ethan never raising his voice during difficult meetings, never taking public credit after successful product launches, and never correcting people who assumed someone else deserved recognition. She had mistaken his quiet confidence for ordinary competence. The realization became more uncomfortable with every mile. When she finally arrived at the modest brick building, she looked through the front window before opening the door. Ethan was kneeling beside an aging computer while two teenagers excitedly tested a program they had finally repaired themselves. Emma laughed from across the room as her father applauded their accomplishment instead of demonstrating his own expertise. No cameras surrounded him. No executives praised him. No impressive office reflected his importance. Yet everyone inside that small classroom looked at Ethan with genuine trust and respect. Standing silently outside the glass, Victoria understood something that no business report had ever taught her. The greatest experts do not create dependence. They quietly create confidence in everyone around them. Victoria Hayes remained outside the Community Learning Center for nearly a full minute before opening the door. She had rehearsed several professional introductions during the drive, yet none of them seemed appropriate anymore. The polished confidence that usually guided every executive conversation had quietly disappeared. Ethan looked up from the computer he had been repairing and offered the same calm smile he had shown on the day she dismissed him. "Good afternoon, Victoria," he said gently. "I did not expect to see you here." She glanced around the modest classroom where students continued working together, encouraged rather than intimidated by mistakes. "I hope I am not interrupting." Ethan shook his head. Learning should never stop because someone walks into the room. He excused himself from the students after reminding them to test every solution twice before assuming it was correct. Emma noticed Victoria standing near the entrance. She recognized her from the company family picnic years earlier and politely smiled before returning to her homework. Ethan walked toward Victoria with the same steady composure that had always defined him. There was no bitterness in his expression, no satisfaction at seeing the company's leader uncomfortable, only quiet curiosity. Victoria took a slow breath before speaking. "The company is in serious trouble." Ethan listened without interrupting. "The system has nearly stopped functioning," she continued. "Our engineers, our consultants, even Ryan cannot restore it. We have spent the entire day trying everything we know." Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before asking a simple question. "Has anyone been hurt?" Victoria looked surprised. "No." Ethan nodded with visible relief. "That is good." She hesitated before continuing. "I came here because we need your help." The words were difficult to say, but they were honest. Ethan remained silent for several seconds, looking through the classroom window where the students continued solving problems together without realizing the conversation taking place nearby. Finally, he asked, "How are the engineers holding up?" Victoria answered quietly. "They are exhausted. Most of them have not left their desks since early this morning." Ethan gave another thoughtful nod. "They care about the company." "They do," Victoria replied. "And they trusted me." The weight in her voice revealed more than the sentence itself. Ethan gently picked up his tool bag and closed it. "I never wanted them to experience something like this." Victoria looked at him with genuine confusion. "After everything that happened, you still sound concerned about us." Ethan smiled softly. People and decisions are not always the same thing. The simplicity of his answer left her without words. Emma quietly walked over carrying her backpack. "Dad, are you going somewhere?" Ethan knelt beside her. "Some friends need help with a difficult problem." Emma looked at Victoria, then back at her father. "Will you help them?" Ethan brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. "If someone is struggling and you have the ability to help, you should never let pride become another problem." Emma smiled and handed him the small lunch container she had packed that morning. "Then you should take this in case you get hungry." Ethan thanked her before standing again. During the drive back toward downtown Seattle, neither he nor Victoria spoke very much. Rain began falling lightly across the windshield as evening traffic slowed along Interstate 5. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Ethan kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Perhaps later. Right now, there are people depending on that system." When they arrived at company headquarters, exhausted employees immediately noticed Ethan walking through the lobby carrying the same worn leather bag he had taken away exactly 30 days earlier. Conversation stopped almost instantly. Daniel Foster stood first, followed by several engineers who had once worked beside him. No one applauded. No one celebrated. They simply watched in respectful silence as the quiet man they had underestimated returned without anger, without demands, and without asking for anything except one simple request. "Before anyone changes another line," Ethan said calmly, looking around the operations center, "show me what the system is trying to protect." Ethan did not rush toward the keyboards or begin issuing dramatic commands. Instead, he quietly placed his worn leather bag beside an empty chair and slowly studied every monitoring screen across the operations center. Engineers waited anxiously, expecting immediate instructions, but Ethan remained completely still. Nearly 2 full minutes passed before he finally spoke. "Tell me everything that changed during the past 30 days. Do not tell me what failed. Tell me what you believed had improved." The room fell silent. Ryan Collins stepped forward first. His confident voice from previous weeks had become noticeably calmer. We replaced several custom automation services with standardized enterprise solutions. We simplified resource balancing, monitoring, and recovery scheduling. We believe those custom processes created unnecessary complexity. Ethan nodded without criticism. Why did you believe they were unnecessary? Ryan answered honestly. Because they were almost invisible. Ethan looked around the room before replying. The strongest foundations usually are. No one argued. Daniel opened Ethan's handwritten documentation while several engineers projected system diagrams across the main display. Ethan carefully traced digital pathways with his finger, occasionally asking small questions that seemed unrelated to the outage. When did this service last complete successfully? Which automated repair process used to support this database? What happened after this scheduler was removed? Each answer slowly revealed another missing connection. The system had not collapsed because of one catastrophic mistake. It had weakened little by little as invisible protections disappeared one after another until every remaining process depended on support that no longer existed. Ethan quietly smiled, not because the problem was simple, but because it finally made sense. The system is behaving exactly as it was instructed, he said gently. It is not broken. It is trying to protect information without the tools that once helped it do that. Victoria watched him carefully. He never blamed Ryan. He never reminded anyone that he had warned against removing hidden safeguards. He simply continued following the evidence wherever it led. Ethan pulled a chair beside Ryan rather than sitting alone at the primary console. Would you like to solve this with me? Ryan looked surprised. After everything that happened? Ethan answered with quiet sincerity. You are here now. That is what matters. For the first time since joining the company, Ryan lowered his pride completely. I should have listened instead of assuming. Ethan smiled warmly. Then today is already better than yesterday. Together, they began restoring carefully selected automation layers from archived backups while avoiding changes that could create additional instability. Ethan explained every decision before making it, turning the emergency into a lesson instead of a performance. Younger engineers gathered nearby, taking notes as he described relationships between services that no software manual could fully capture. A system is like a neighborhood, Ethan explained. Every house matters, but what truly keeps everyone safe are the roads connecting them. Remove enough roads, and eventually every house becomes isolated. One by one, warning indicators slowly changed from red to orange. Then several turned yellow. The first successful customer transaction appeared on a monitoring screen, followed moments later by another. Quiet relief spread through the operations center, but Ethan immediately raised one hand. Do not celebrate yet. Stability is earned one careful step at a time. Another 30 minutes passed as transaction queues gradually recovered. Communication platforms reconnected. Customer dashboards refreshed without errors. The largest display in the room finally returned to a steady field of green indicators. Nobody cheered. Nobody shouted. The engineers simply looked toward Ethan with the kind of respect that cannot be requested and cannot be manufactured. Victoria felt an unexpected weight in her chest as she realized that the greatest achievement unfolding before her was not the restoration of millions of lines of software. It was watching a man who had every reason to seek recognition choose instead to restore confidence in every person standing beside him. In that quiet operations center, surrounded by humming servers and tired faces, everyone finally understood that true expertise is measured not by how indispensable someone becomes, but by how many people leave believing they can become better because they work beside them. The following morning, sunlight reflected across the glass walls of Hayes Digital Solutions as employees returned to an office that felt strangely different. The emergency had passed, but the silence remained. People no longer hurried through the hallways with the same certainty they had carried only weeks earlier. Instead, conversations became quieter, greetings lasted a little longer, and more than once an engineer paused simply to thank a colleague for staying late during the crisis. Ethan Brooks arrived early, carrying the same weathered leather bag that had quietly accompanied him through every chapter of his career. He did not walk toward the executive offices. Instead, he stopped first inside the engineering department, greeting each employee by name and asking how much sleep they had managed to get after the long night. The questions seemed simple, yet they reminded everyone that the system had never been the only thing worth protecting. Victoria Hayes spent the morning reviewing years of internal records that had rarely attracted executive attention. Buried inside archive project folders, she discovered dozens of documents Ethan had written during evenings and weekends. There were disaster recovery guides, training manuals, mentoring plans, architecture explanations, and personal notes encouraging future engineers to improve every design rather than preserve it out of loyalty. None of the documents carried his name in large letters. Most simply ended with the same quiet reminder: leave the next person better prepared than you were. Victoria continued searching. She found emails recommending promotions for junior engineers instead of requesting recognition for himself. She discovered proposals asking for larger training budgets even when it meant delaying improvements to his own department. She even found recommendations suggesting that one day the company should build systems simple enough that no single employee, including himself, would ever become indispensable. She slowly leaned back in her chair, realizing the painful irony. The one person who had worked hardest to make himself replaceable had been replaced by people who never understood why he built the company that way. Later that afternoon, Victoria invited the entire engineering division into the largest conference room. Ryan Collins stood near the front beside Ethan, no longer separated by titles or expectations. The atmosphere felt nothing like the meeting from 1 month earlier. Nobody expected applause. Nobody anticipated impressive presentations. Victoria stepped forward and spoke with complete honesty. I believed experience could be measured by reputation. I believed leadership meant finding the most celebrated expert. I was wrong. The room remained completely silent. She turned toward Ethan. I judged your value by what I could see instead of everything you quietly prevented. I failed to recognize that the strongest work often receives the least attention. Ethan simply nodded with gentle understanding. Before Victoria could continue, Ryan stepped forward. I owe everyone here an apology as well. I arrived believing my credentials were enough. I never asked why the existing system worked before deciding how to improve it. Ethan never treated me like an opponent. He treated me like a teammate, even after I replaced him. I will never forget that. Several younger engineers lowered their eyes, visibly moved by the sincerity in his voice. Ethan finally spoke. Every engineer in this room will someday inherit work created by someone else. Before changing anything, first understand the kindness hidden inside it. Most systems are not built by perfect people. They are built by people trying to protect others from problems they hope nobody will ever experience. The words settled deeply across the room. They sounded less like technical advice and more like a philosophy for life itself. When the meeting ended, employees quietly returned to their desks carrying something far more valuable than restored software. They carried a renewed respect for patience, humility, and shared responsibility. Victoria remained behind for a moment, looking at the empty conference room where 1 month earlier she had confidently announced a decision she believed would strengthen the company. Now she finally understood that true leadership was never about replacing quiet people with louder ones. It was about recognizing the quiet people before their absence became the loudest lesson of all. 1 year later, the lobby of Hayes Digital Solutions looked almost the same, yet everything important had changed. The sunlight still poured through the tall windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Employees still hurried toward morning meetings with coffee in hand, and computer screens still displayed complex systems serving customers across the country. But something new had quietly become part of the company's identity. Along one wall stood a simple bronze plaque that every new employee passed during orientation. It did not celebrate record profits, prestigious awards, or groundbreaking technology. Instead, it carried a single sentence that had become the company's guiding principle. The strongest systems are built by people who choose to strengthen others. Those words had come directly from Ethan Brooks. After the crisis, Victoria Hayes had offered him every executive position the company could create. She proposed a larger office, a higher salary, and a title that reflected his extraordinary contribution. Ethan thanked her sincerely before declining each offer. Titles change every few years, he had explained with his familiar calm smile. People remember those who helped them become better for much longer. Together they designed something entirely different. Instead of leading another department, Ethan established the Brooks Engineering Fellowship, a year-round mentoring program dedicated to developing young engineers through patience, practical problem-solving, and shared responsibility. Every new technical employee spent time learning not only how the company's systems functioned, but why each decision had been made. The program became known throughout the industry because participants were encouraged to ask questions before offering solutions and to understand people before changing processes. Ryan Collins volunteered to become the fellowship's first senior mentor. He often began each training session with complete honesty. The most expensive mistake of my career was believing experience could be replaced by confidence. Those words always captured the attention of every new engineer. Victoria changed as well. Her leadership meetings became noticeably different. Instead of asking who deserved credit for successful projects, she regularly asked who had quietly prevented problems that nobody else had noticed. Promotions increasingly recognized collaboration, mentorship, and long-term thinking alongside technical excellence. The company recovered not only its reputation but also earned respect for creating a workplace where humility carried as much value as innovation. On a bright Saturday morning, the Community Learning Center where Ethan had volunteered for years held its annual technology fair. Families gathered around student projects while children proudly demonstrated programs they had written and computers they had restored. Emma Brooks, now 1 year older, confidently presented her own science project explaining how strong systems depend on many small parts working together with trust. At the end of her presentation, a judge smiled and asked, "Who taught you to think that way?" Emma looked toward her father across the room. Ethan was helping another student adjust a simple circuit board, giving the same quiet encouragement he offered everyone. She smiled proudly before answering, "My dad taught me that the most important part of solving any problem is remembering that people matter more than the problem." The judge nodded with genuine admiration. Across the room, Victoria watched the exchange beside Ryan and Daniel Foster. None of them interrupted. None of them stepped forward to congratulate Ethan publicly. They understood him well enough now to know he never sought the spotlight. Instead, they simply stood together in respectful silence, grateful that life had given them a second chance to recognize a man whose greatest strength had never been the systems he designed. It had always been the character he quietly lived every single day. As the afternoon sunlight filled the community center and children's laughter echoed through the halls, Ethan looked around the room with peaceful contentment. The company had recovered. The engineers had grown stronger. Emma was learning to lead with kindness. In the end, the greatest legacy he built was never hidden inside millions of lines of code. It lived inside ordinary people who had learned that quiet dignity, humble wisdom, and generous hearts could hold together far more than any system ever could.